real vision, a beautiful royal blue banner strung up over the old sign of the Fred Sido Antique Shop. It was an advertisement, but that was strange. The creepy old antique shop had been closed for decades, and no one went near it. She slid her bike to a stop to see what this 20-foot poster was advertising. Whatever it was, it had to be big news. No one in town would have been foolish enough to buy that old dilapidated shop. It had sat empty for as long as Scarlet could remember, and most people avoided it completely. Kids crossed the street rather than walk past it on their way to school in the morning, and even the adults moved to the other side when dusk fell. The place had a reputation, a bad one. The last owner had been found dead in the back room. There'd been a call to the police over a domestic disturbance. Whatever happened, it left the shopkeeper's wife and kids dead in that home, and old Mr. Sido missing. Well, until the police came and found him in the back room. Now everyone said the place was haunted. It wasn't just the school kids that thought it. There were stories the old guys told, the ones who used to hang out on the benches outside the Copper Rooster on warm summer days. They said every owner of that building had met an untimely death. Their tales went all the way back to a time when it was known as Multnomah, Indian land. It was supposed to be built on formerly holy grounds, but now it was cursed. But that was all just talk. At least that's what Scarlet's mother said. So she wasn't afraid to stop and stare up at the sign blowing in the wind. It was draped from one side of the shop clear across to the other. "Sheesh," she exclaimed. That sign must have cost a bundle. Even from where she sat on her bike, she could see the fabric wasn't the cheap woven plastic usually reserved for marketing notices. No, this looked more like fancy dress material, the kind she'd seen hanging on mannequins in the windows of expensive European boutiques, instead of over the fronts of run-down, abandoned stores. Sitting down beneath it, she could hear the wind rustling inside the thick folds of the material, causing it to billow in and out like the air from someone's chest. Only that was silly. This building wasn't alive. It was only a store. But the sign made a promise. Coming soon, it said. It waved back and forth over the doorway like a pretty bow hung on a present to tempt the receiver, saying, "This is going to be something special. Just wait and see when it's opened." She wished she could reach up to run her hand over the smooth fabric, over those high, overpriced designer fabrics that dressmakers use to entice people to do just what she was doing today, stopping. She didn't even care that the beautiful blue sky had suddenly been smudged by a thick band of gray clouds that stretched out over the horizon and got darker with each passing moment. Somehow, the deep obsidian-colored clouds seemed more fitting than the beautiful bright blue sky. At least this color matched her mood. The corners of her mouth twitched and almost moved into the beginnings of a smile. When she thought about it, it seemed the same band of clouds had been following her for the last 2 months, ever since she'd caught Cam and Lauren together. Mom kept telling her there are more fish in the sea and to just move on. But it wasn't so easy. Breaking up with Cam was the hardest thing she'd ever done. It was even worse because he was the only guy she'd ever loved, and she caught him cheating on her with her best friend. The thought made a tear run down her cheek. Scar brushed it away with the back of her sleeve, then shook her head and whispered up to the ebony-colored clouds. I didn't only lose the love of my life, I lost my best friend at the same time. Suddenly she heard a chuckle from behind her. Then somebody said, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." Scar jumped in her seat and almost fell off her bike. Turning her head, she searched the shadows, but couldn't see where the voice was coming from. She snapped back. "The stupidest thing I ever heard was your voice." "Great comeback," he laughed. "Look, all I'm saying is friends don't lie and sneak around behind your back with your boyfriend. So, if you were stupid enough to think she was a friend, you must be a total loser to call her your best friend, even if it's in the past tense. You have no idea what you're talking about. You don't know anything about it, about me or Lauren or Cam." Her voice boiled up with each word until it sounded like a shrill tea kettle hissing at him. "More than you could imagine," he said. Then he added in a husky whisper, "More than I ever wanted." He stepped out of the shadows. Scarlet couldn't make out his face. The banner blowing back and forth created a strobe light effect. In the deepening darkness, the shadows smeared over his features. Too quickly to make them out, she jumped off the side of her bike to step up to him and tell him what she really thought of someone who could see someone crying and then make fun of them. But by the time she leaned her bike up against the side of the shop, he was gone. "Real brave," she snorted. "Insult someone, then disappear." She heard someone clear his throat behind her and spun around with a gasp. He was leaning up against the railing that surrounded the edge of the property, grinning. "I wasn't trying to insult you, and I'm no magician. I couldn't disappear even if I wanted to. But thanks for the compliments," he said, laughing. He looked up at her with those green eyes that shone bright even beneath the dark sky. And those dimples. He was the best-looking guy she'd ever seen. And she would have sworn the air warmed up and the clouds separated as he held his hand out in the air, offering it to her. Truce? She chewed on her lower lip, considering him and the possibilities. "Let me think about it." "Wow," he grinned. "My words must have really wounded you, if you can't even shake my hand." "Words are like weapons, only more painful," she said, and felt a random tear rush down her cheek. He reached up to brush it away. When his fingers touched her skin, her entire body tingled with an electricity Scarlet never felt before. "Look, I didn't mean anything about it. I'm sorry." She took a deep breath. "I'm Scarlet," she said, trying to smile. He nodded. "I know. Like I said, I know more about you than you could ever imagine." She took a step back. "What? How? Are you some kind of stalker?" He groaned, stumbling back and grabbing his chest, like it had been pierced by a shot. "You're right. Your words are like arrows aimed straight at my heart." Scarlet sneered, watching him perform like a character in some Shakespearean play. "I'm no stalker," he finally said, offering her his hand again. "I'm Drake, and I've seen you in algebra class, 3rd period." She frowned, surveying his face. "I thought you looked familiar." Right. Her eyes focused on him again. yours, and Lauren. But believe me, she's no friend, and I wouldn't be using that term to describe her, even in the past tense. I think you might have already said that, she sighed, feeling an overwhelming sense of loss again. It obviously bears repeating, he said, shaking his head. Look, Scarlett told him, I know what she did was wrong, but we've been friends since we were little kids. I can't let some guy ruin that. Now can I? Some guy. He rolled the words around in his mouth like he was considering what that really meant. Then he shook his head again. Look, Scar, you've got to remember, she's the one who stole him away from you. She should have been more trustworthy than that, especially if you've been friends since you were little kids. You're right, she said. A strange little sob slipped out with that last word. You've got to let them go. He agreed, trying to encourage her. Just get over it. Now you sound just like my mother, she said. Then her temper flared. What did this stranger know about breaking up with someone after dating for 2 solid years? Probably nothing. Her heart raced as her blood started to boil. What would you know about letting go of someone you love? He took a deep breath and said, more than you might think. His gaze turned down to the ground, avoiding her stare. I'm sorry, she said, seeing his muscles slump and the obvious truth to his words. I didn't mean to snap like that. It's just that what? Cam and I, well, you know, I thought we were in love. He chuckled, but there was no humor to the sound. No, I don't know. Sorry. That's one subject I know very little about. Yeah, right, she sneered, bending down to look up into his eyes, because she thought he was joking. But the muscles in his face were tight, too tight. I find that hard to believe. Why? He looked up at her. Well, she felt funny saying it out loud. You're so handsome and sensitive. Thanks, he laughed, then raising one eyebrow, he added, I think. It was meant as a compliment, honestly, and I'm not usually like this. I don't share all the boring details of my life, my love life, what there is of one, especially not with strangers. It's not boring, but you're right. I'd rather get to know more about you and your life and less about Cam and Lauren. Besides, I've already heard more than I'd like to about that subject. Said I was sorry, she said, turning to the building. This is what I came here for. What is this place now? There was a sudden loud noise inside the shop. Both stopped talking to look. He shook his head. Every muscle in Drake's body seemed so tense and rigid. Scar got worried. But before she could say a word about it, he took a deep breath and said, Are you hungry? Scarlett hadn't even thought about food lately. She just wanted to get away from the school, away from volleyball practice, but mostly away from Cam and Lauren before he came out of the boys' gym in his basketball practice. She didn't want to have to face him, not today. Today was 2 months after she caught him. She shook her head. You're not hungry, Drake asked, seeing her shaking her head. No, she grinned, it's not that. I was just thinking. But, yeah, I'm hungry. It's just that I need to get home. Mom won't be worried about me. Practice was over a while ago. I've got to check in. Well then, can I walk you home? If it's okay with your mom. Maybe we could go out and get something to eat together. She thought about it for a moment. She hadn't gone out with anyone, not since. She turned to Drake. Sure, she said. Why not? Well, don't make it sound so exciting as all that, he said, grabbing his heart again, as if her words had once more wounded him. I'm sorry, she grinned, watching him perform for her. It's just that I haven't gone out with anyone since. Well, then he interrupted her before she could go on. Looks like it's about time. He walked over to her bike, pulled it away from the building, and began walking with it. Are you coming? He called back over his shoulder. Where do you think you're going? She giggled. I mean, how do you even know which way I live? He shook his head seriously. I already told you. I mean, how many times do I have to tell you? I know more about you than you'd ever believe. Great, she laughed. So you are a stalker. He shrugged. Maybe I'll become one later. He laughed, then turned to look at her with a smile that made her feel all warm and fuzzy inside. After all, you never know what new beginnings might bring. That's the end of chapter 1.